From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Open Line.
Welcome, everyone, to Open Line. It's November 4th, 2020, the day after the presidential election, and we do not have a winner. No winner has been declared, and what a remarkable time. Today's show, we're going to talk about the most timely of issues. We're talking about mail-in balloting. That is certainly what this race is going to come down to as we count these mail-in votes in some of these swing states all across the country. We are all going to become experts on mail-in balloting. This show will give you some of the information that can help you kind of compress all of that, process all of that. So, happy to have with us two guests who can help us answer questions about mail-in balloting. First of all, Marian with the Tennessee League of Women Voters. Marian, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And Albert Tieche, he's the former administrator of elections in Davidson County. You may remember. Albert, thank you for being here.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
All right, let me ask, Marian, we are hearing that there could be fraud and there could be all kinds of problems. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on how secure mail-in ballots are?
Okay. I think they're very secure. I'd like to put out a couple of facts and just my perspective. So first of all, I think even the Heritage Foundation, which is a very conservative think tank and who tracks these things, has found very, very few instances of voter fraud of any type. So we're talking like put 4 zeros and then any digit you want. So that's very minimal fraud. The second thing I think we should keep in context here is Tennessee is like in the bottom 5 of states in terms of voter participation. Now, yay, we did a lot better yesterday than we did 4 years ago in terms of the percent of us that participated. But when we think about our election policies, we need to be voter-centric. We need to be making it easier for people to vote, not put up barriers. So for this election, it was really good that people had the option to vote by mail, or at least some of us did in Tennessee. So we weren't trying to choose between our health and our vote. So I think voters should be confident that their mail-in ballot is secure. And I think we all need to be patient now because it does take longer to count them. We should all want them to be counted accurately, correctly, and to have every vote count.
And I want to get into, as we go on, how exactly they are counted, that whole process. But Albert, I'll ask you the same question. What are your thoughts on mail-in ballots? You're former administrator of elections, Davidson County. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would first draw the distinction between what is called a mail-in ballot and what is an absentee ballot. And an absentee ballot, the person requesting the absentee ballot has to make a request for that. Fill out a form, send that form in, and then that person is sent an absentee ballot. They fill it out, return it in an envelope with a lot of information on the outside. That information is verified from the information on the outside of the envelope before the ballot is ever opened. That's a pretty good process. I think Tennessee has a good process. The absentee ballot process is not as secure as election day voting or early voting because you do lose chain of custody of the ballot when it's in the mailbox and in the hands. When it leaves the election commission, it's in the U.S. mail, it's in the mailbox. You don't have a real clear chain of custody like you do when you go to vote. If you vote in person, I usually vote early. They have a really good system. I like that system. You fill out your ballot, you hand carry your ballot over to the machine that counts that ballot, and then that ballot is actually, a paper ballot is retained in case there's a need for a recount. The term mail-in ballot, I think, needs to be distinguished from absentee. The absentee process is kind of tried and true. Yeah, it's not quite as secure, but it's better than the alternative, which would be not allowing people who can't get to the polls to vote. So we don't want to do that. That's a bad idea. Mail-in ballots, if some states, it varies from state to state. Some states just mail everybody, every registered voter, an absentee ballot. Now you've got a lot of ballots out there in outside the chain of custody, and it does open up opportunities for voter fraud. What percentage? Who knows the answer to that question. So I want to draw that distinction between Tennessee's absentee ballot process, which I think is very good, and other states that are using mail-ins. Some states have mailed ballots to all registered voters. Some states have mailed applications for absentee ballots to all registered voters. Some states require people, like our absentee process, to request that absentee ballot. So there's various ways that it's done from state to state. The National Conference of State Legislatures has on their website a chart that tells you how each state did it, and it is doing it now for 2020. And I think that's a pretty helpful chart.
So there's a distinction. But you feel like Tennessee did it well, has done it well.
I do.
All right. What about Marian? Okay, so what about some of these other states where the election will hinge? We're going to hear all about Pennsylvania. We're going to hear a lot about Arizona, Nevada, all these places. What about other states? Marian, I'll ask you first. How do you feel?
I still feel very secure about both vote by mail and absentee vote by mail. We do the absentee by mail here in Tennessee. I think most of the states that we're watching right now do the same thing. So that means that a voter has filled out some sort of request that went to election officials. They compared that request to the voter rolls before they sent a ballot. When you get that absentee ballot, you fill it out, and when you send it back, and the process varies by state, they're checking your ballot and generally checking your signature before it goes to get counted. And I think that's why we're seeing it take longer to count the votes in some of these battleground states, particularly Pennsylvania and Michigan, and I guess Georgia's absentee ballots as well. But we shouldn't be surprised by that, and we should expect it. Think about what has to happen to count an absentee ballot when it comes back. Generally, there's an outside envelope you have to open up. You have to take out, in Tennessee's case, and I'm presuming other states are similar, now you have the ballot envelope, but it's got an affidavit on the there, and you check that affidavit against the voter roll to make sure, yes, Marian is on our voter roll, and yes, that's her signature. Then you tear that off and say, okay, this is a good ballot, and it goes somewhere else. In Tennessee, we get to do that before Election Day, but then on Election Day, all of those ballots in sealed envelopes that have been put in a secure, I don't know what they do, bins or trash cans or something, but they're secured so nobody can get to them. Then on Election Day in Davidson County, I think they had over 30,000 of them. They had to be slit open, or I think maybe they got a machine now that could open them. You pull the ballot out, it's got to be flattened out. It has to be inspected to make sure that, people filled in the circles and didn't put a check next to them. And that takes, I think in Tennessee, we use 4 people to do tranches of ballots to make sure that everything is on the up and up. And then they get put through the sorter. So that takes longer. I think we should commend our Tennessee election officials because they certainly thought this through and planned ahead, and obviously had enough equipment, scanners, and enough people to get it done.
So it definitely takes longer. Yeah.
It takes longer, but Tennessee restricts who can vote absentee by mail. Most states, I think there are only 5 or 6 that did not allow anybody who wanted to vote by mail to do so for this election. In Tennessee, unless you were you met an excuse, you were 60 or older or had an underlying condition for COVID, that was the only allowance they made for the pandemic for vote by mail. Now, they did a great job when you voted in person in terms of the PP and all, but we had fewer absentee by mail than if we had opened it up for anybody in the state who wanted to vote that way.
Right, okay. And so it takes longer, as you said. So I'll ask you, Albert, Tieche, so we're hearing the president say he believes there's widespread fraud, and basically saying that the election, really casting doubt on the validity of mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and the election in general. What do you think when you hear the president saying that?
Well, my thought is I would never want to agree to a process where you mail every registered voter a ballot, because now all of your ballots are outside the chain of custody. You have no control over those. And if you think about how careful the election officials are, the poll workers are when you vote either on election day or early, they're very careful about, is every I dotted, is every T crossed? Once you put millions of ballots in mailboxes, that guarantee has gone. So I think it's, we agree that Tennessee has a good system. And Tennessee did allow, for medical reasons, you could send in that absentee ballot application, it would be granted. It's a pretty good process. And I think there's a balancing. You have to do some, what's it called, checks and balances, but it's risk reward. As I said before, it would be worse than losing the custody of the ballot to tell people that can't get to the polls that they can't vote. So we open that up, that possibility that we don't have control of that ballot, that fraud could occur in a small number of ballots, because we want people to have the opportunity to vote. So I like Tennessee's system a lot. Do not like the idea that we're going to mail millions of ballots and expect that humans, being who we are and what our nature is like, that no one is ever going to cheat.
What states did that? So you like Tennessee, but do you know what states? So what is it? Some of these that we're talking about? Some of these swing states?
Yeah, I was looking for the swing states, and there's not a lot of swing states. California mailed everybody. Colorado mailed everybody. Hawaii mailed everybody.
Utah's vote by mail.
I'm sorry?
Utah.
I haven't gotten there. I'm going alphabetical. Montana did it by county. Nevada, yes to everybody. New Jersey, yes to everybody. Oregon, yes to everybody. Utah, yes for everybody. Vermont, yes. Washington, yes. So those are the ones that mailed, and I'm assuming they mailed to all their registered voters. One of the things that I would have wanted to know is, are you going to mail to your inactive voters or not mail to your inactive voters? Are you going to send out a mailer prior to sending the ballot to your inactives to see if indeed they are there and do live there? I think it's important to maintain due diligence, so you know that you are always minimizing the opportunities for fraud, because humans are humans. And if you announce that you're going to remove all of the state police from the interstate, you can't really say, I know that nobody's going to speed, because some people are going to speed. Now, most people won't, but some people will.
So the states you just mentioned, only one do I hear that is an actual one of these swing states, Nevada.
I agree with it. It doesn't appear that there are any swing states that mail to everybody.
So, Marian, let me ask you, what do you think when you hear President Trump saying the election is rigged? I mean, I was driving in listening to talk radio. They're saying they're trying to steal the election based on these mail-in ballots. The president's saying we should stop counting. What do you think when you hear these things?
I think he is not informed about the rigorous process that our election officials have. In all of this, let's just put Nevada aside for now. We could talk even more about all vote by mail, but let's talk about the states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, the ones that we're watching now that have absentee vote by mail, where the voter has requested it. So there's so many checks and balances that go with this absentee voting. It is just as when you go in to vote in person, they're checking you in. You're not accounting for that time. That's just part of what you do on election day. But now think about all of these, in some cases, millions of absentee ballots where that same check-in process has to happen once. I don't think they could start counting till the day of the election or when the polls close. I think it varied by state. It just takes time, but it takes time because the ballots The names are being compared to the voter rolls. The signatures are being verified. They're making sure there's only one ballot per envelope, et cetera, et cetera. And I just have to make some comment back about this. Well, if there's no state police, we might speed. I think a speeding ticket is a ticket. You know, you pay your fine, you might have to go to online school, it might cost you a little more on your auto insurance. Voter fraud is a felony. It costs you jail time, it costs you a fine, it costs you your right to vote in the future. So it's pretty serious. They're very serious consequences for voter fraud, which is why I think it's pretty low.
Okay. I'll go ahead, sure.
One of the things that I ran into when I was administrator was I think it was 16 cases of clear-cut voter fraud in Davidson County, all the evidence, took it to the district attorney, and he basically said, you know, I'm really not interested in prosecuting these. And of course, as an election official, you say, why not? Well, I have limited resources, which is true. I have murders, I have rapes, I have robberies, I have gangs, I have all of these things on which to expend my resources, and you would like me to expend my resources on voter fraud in an election that was won by a landslide and didn't make any difference. I'm not going to do it. So he had a legitimate reason for not doing it, but I will tell you, as someone who has walked the cases in with all the research and all the documentation, only to be told, sorry, there's just no compelling reason to prosecute this. So when I hear that there's no voter fraud, having sat with the district attorney, I understand why these decisions are being made. There's one other point I want to make as well. I love Tennessee's system. I think it's very good. I think Marian and I both agree on that. I think if everybody had a system like Tennessee, there would be very few opportunities for anybody to claim voter fraud. But everybody doesn't have a system like Tennessee. And the other point I want to make is when, Taylor, you go to the poll, I go to the poll, Marian goes to the poll, we are going to show a photo ID, whether it's early voting, whether it's election day voting. However, if we make an application for an absentee ballot, there is no photo ID. So we are down to signature match. If you've ever sat and done signature matches as like on petitions, where you are looking at signatures on a computer screen, the signature that's on file for the voter and the signature that's on that envelope or the signature that's on that petition, there are vast differences, particularly as people age, their signatures change. It is not an exact science to do verification by signature match. It can be done, people do it, it's more difficult than photo ID. Now, one other point about signature matching. One of the things, and Marian mentioned this, in Tennessee, you're going to have members of both parties sitting together at the table. Everyone is observing everyone else. Again, I sound like a broken record. It's a great system because everybody's keeping everybody honest. I have heard anecdotally, I do not know this to be the truth, but I have heard that that is not the case in Pennsylvania. Again, I don't know this for a fact. But I've heard that they don't have that requirement, that you have members of both parties observing. I'd like to know that. And one other thing about Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Marian mentioned this and it's true, they have certain restrictions. You can't just ask for an absentee ballot because you want an absentee ballot. When I look down the list on the National National Conference of State Legislators, Pennsylvania did not, it says not applicable for whether or not they expanded access to absentee ballots in the 2020 election. I am assuming that the reason they did not expand was there was no opportunity to expand, i.e. they were already offering that to anyone who makes the application for an absentee ballot that they may have that. So there was no need to expand it in Pennsylvania. Apparently there are no restrictions in Pennsylvania if we're talking about that particular system.
As somebody, okay, well, let me ask you this. As somebody who has administered elections, do you feel like it erodes the confidence in elections, in our electoral process, when the president says that this kind of voting is fraudulent, that there is mass fraud going on? Do you think it erodes confidence in the integrity of our elections?
Well, what you're asking me to do is say, oh, I disagree with President Trump saying this phrase. What I will tell you is, if you launch into massive mail-out ballots where you lose the chain of custody of ballots, you are opening that door to opportunities for fraud. Are they there? I can't prove that, but you have opened that door. There's simply no way around that. I mean, the Christian Adams wrote a book, Injustice, and he looked at Noxubee County, Mississippi, and they actually sent some people to jail down there, and they were doing all of their fraud with absentee ballots. And it's an old known method. If you really want to commit voter fraud, the absentee ballots are the way to go. That's, election officials know that. But again, I reiterate, it's better to use the absentee ballots than to disenfranchise those voters. So that's why we use it, but in a limited basis. When you expand it to everyone, as for mail-in ballots, you open opportunities for fraud, period. That's there. Now you can say, well, it doesn't exist. Yeah, well, it doesn't exist if you don't prosecute them. It doesn't exist if you don't find them. I didn't speed if I didn't get my ticket. I got away with it. So, I don't really want to participate in saying, oh, I agree with him, or I don't agree with him, or he shouldn't say that, or he should say that. But I will say, looking at the procedures, if you're mailing out to everybody shotgun, you've opened up the door for fraud, period.
Okay, and then Marian, what do you say to that?
Well, I'll just go right to this current election. There was twice people went to the court to try to limit and put constraints on the absentee by mail voting in Pennsylvania, alleging fraud. And basically the judge said, prove it. And the cases didn't go any further. And it was a Republican judge. Not that I think judges are Republican and Democrat, but it was a judge appointed by a Republican. So, we can allege it, but let's have confidence based on the facts and our experience, which is that we know how to count these ballots. And it is very hard, and even harder as we put better and better systems in place. In Tennessee, and I know pretty sure in Pennsylvania too, because I have relatives there, when you request an absentee ballot, you know that you got your ballot, you can track that it got back. And if somebody's using my name to vote absentee and I go to vote and they tell me I've already voted, I assure you they would hear from me. And I think most people this election would be pretty frosted by that. And that would start surfacing and we would all understand it.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of lays the framework here for the discussion. So we're going to take a break. We'll start taking calls. If you want to call in, there's a number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.